Hello everyone, welcome back to Season 3, Episode 2 of the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. Today's guest is Marlowe Johnson. Marlowe is the CEO of recently launched ETS subsidiary EdAgree, a company that is dedicated to optimizing long-term outcomes for international students, supporting their journey from research to application to graduation and beyond. Before founding EdAgree, Mr. Johnson worked in the EdTech space at ETS, 2U and Pearson as a product owner and developer. He's also worked as a primary, secondary and post-secondary teacher in Cameroon, Tanzania, South Korea, China and the USA. I hope you enjoy today's podcast.
Hey everyone, buckle up for a new episode of the EFL Magazine Business Podcast, the one and only podcast made to help you launch your business or take your existing business to a level of success you could never have imagined. Whether you're a school owner, freelancer, publisher, or other entrepreneur, you're sure to pick up lots of actionable advice when you listen to the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. Remember to visit eflmagazine.com for great articles and features. Without further ado, here's your host, the founder of EFL Magazine, Philip Pound.
Here we go. Welcome back, everybody, to the latest episode of the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. And we're getting some really big hitters and getting more and more stars. And today in the firmament, we have Marlowe Johnson from EdAgree. He's the founder and CEO of EdAgree. That's EdAgree, EdAgree.com, a subsidiary of Educational Testing Services, better known as ETS, who are known for TOEIC and TOEFL and SAT. Is that correct? And GRE and no, did I get some of those wrong?
Related to SAT through College Board,
yeah.
But that's more of a College Board. But all of those tests that are designed to torture kids, yeah, we're there.
Oh, okay, that's the one. We'll move on to that in a little bit. And where are you today, Marlowe? It's a really lovely sunny day, sitting outside.
It really is lovely. It feels a bit unfair in December, but I'm here in Florida today, so I had to sit outside.
Oh, very nice. And do you have a holiday home in Florida? Whereabouts in Florida do you?
Close to Jacksonville. So not a holiday home. But we're down here during the holiday.
Gotcha. Okay. So Jacksonville, is that what's Jacksonville? Is that got some association with the Civil War? I've heard that name before. Now I'm not an expert on American history, but where have I heard Jacksonville before?
Well, I mean, it's in the northeast of the state. I don't think there were any major battles here, but this is a coastal area. So just south is St. Augustine, where there's a big Spanish fort that draws in a lot of tourists. And I know there were battles up and down the coast in Florida, but frankly, I'm ignorant on the specifics of the wheres and why fors. Well, the why fors I'm pretty familiar with.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the background. What takes you down to Florida besides the weather, of course, in the winter? Where do you usually live? Where's your base?
So we're actually considering a move here to Florida, but our home base is in New York City, in Manhattan, the Upper West Side. And so my wife and two daughters. My wife is South Korean. We've been in New York for 13, 14 years now. So I guess we're New Yorkers. But considering a move, especially after 2 years of lockdown with COVID and 1,000 square feet to work with.
So tell me, for somebody who doesn't know New York, but obviously I've watched all the TV shows based in New York, NYPD Blue, I was a big fan of in the 90s, showing my age here. But so Upper East Side, Upper West Side, what kind of flavor, what kind of neighborhoods are these?
Yeah, great question. So you can define Manhattan as kind of one of the main areas of New York City. New York City is divided into boroughs, and that kind of stereotypical New York that you see, in Friends and sitcoms like that is Manhattan. And then Manhattan you can think of as having a pin in the middle of it with Central Park. And a lot of neighborhoods are organized around Central Park, which is a really large green space in the middle of an otherwise concrete jungle. The West Side is the west side of the park. The east side is the east side of the park. And we were living on the west side of the park. And there's the upper west side, the lower west side. So upper west side is kind of neighborhoods, bakeries, things like that. The lower west side gets more into businesses, Times Square, things along those lines.
Gotcha. Okay. I'm going to really show myself up here now, but is that near Greenwich Village kind of feeling, or is that completely different?
So Greenwich Village is another neighborhoody feel. It's not so defined by Central Park, though. It's further to the south in Manhattan. So more downtown.
Gotcha. Okay. So I'll have to visit someday. I've never been to New York.
You got to be the Big Apple.
It's of course I want to go, but there are COVID obviously is the elephant in the room. But tell me, where do you come from originally?
So if we really go original, I was born in New York. My dad was teaching at West Point, English literature. But I only lived there until I was 1. And really my origins and my family origins are Mississippi, the deep South in the US. So I have family that has been there for really hundreds of years.
Wow. So your father taught at West Point. So you say what you see the military father, is it like, sir, yes, sir? No, it wasn't so serious, was it?
Not so serious. I think he had an alternative coming out of the ROTC, which is officers training. When one goes to college, he had the option to teach at West Point as opposed to serving actively in the military. So rather than being an active officer, he was an English professor. So that's my name from Christopher Marlowe, right? So he was at West Point for several years before moving back to continue as a professor at the University of Southern Mississippi, where my mom was also a professor.
One of the, I don't know if you know West Point too much, but I only know West Point, well, from movies. But one of the movies John Ford movie with Tyrone Power in the 1950s, The Long Gray Line. Do you know this movie?
Oh, I've never seen it. I know the title, but actually I have not seen it. Yeah.
So the subject of that movie, Marty Marr, is actually from my hometown. Would you believe?
Oh, really?
In Tipperary, yeah. And in my local chapel church, I took on Christmas Day, go for a walk, took my wife, and inside there's a little plaque, and it says this was the church of Marty Marr, who was in the Long Grey Line with Tyrone Power. It's free on Amazon Prime if people want to watch it, but my hometown is actually mentioned in it. Yeah, so
there we have a connection.
There's I think he was a friend of like Eisenhower, all the greats, and he's well known, I think. But a lot of it is fictionalized. The movie, he didn't actually have any children, but must watch it again. So yeah, tell me about growing up in. What's it called, a brat? Were you a brat? I
was not a military brat at all.
Okay.
I can't say I wasn't a brat, but I wasn't a military brat. But grew up in a university town in Mississippi. And I mean, one can imagine Mississippi as very much the countryside, the South. But we had something of our own professorial enclave, I guess you could say. So most of my parents' friends were coming out of the university. So, I grew up fishing and walking in the forest, but also reading Faulkner. So it was quite a mix, but I think a very blessed childhood, because I had, parents who were there. I had an opportunity to explore. And because my father also taught foreign languages, we spent every summer traveling, often in Europe. Very good friends in Italy, where I would just be sent for the summer to stay in Cortona, a hill town in Tuscany.
Nice. Yeah, this is not the typical military life, is it? It's
not at all.
English,
No,
yeah.
The military did not dominate at all.
not at all. So you were named after Christopher Marlowe. That, as we said before the podcast was in, was it going to be Philip Marlowe or Christopher Marlowe? That was one of my questions. But why Christopher Marlowe? Just the name. He liked the name Marlowe, or
I think he really enjoyed the poetry of Christopher Marlowe, and in particular. He was very much into the Faustus mythology, and so I think that was a big part of what he was teaching, where he was coming from. So I think it was just his own inspired choice,
Gotcha.
and no one else in the family named Marlowe. So.
Gotcha. Okay. So did he sell himself out to the military? Maybe I don't know. We won't go too deep. No, just joking, of course.
Dragged off to Helsinki. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me, growing up, and you grew up in the camp or outside. How does that work?
The military only had any place in my life until I was 1 year old at West Point. That's when my family moved back to Mississippi. So after that,
Gotcha.
there was no contact with the military between my father and the military or me. So really, I grew up just as a normal kid of university professors and generally a teaching family. My grandparents were also not professors, but teachers. So it was very much an education-based family. And
Gotcha.
because my father taught foreign languages, we had a lot of external focus, looking at other countries, other cultures. That was a big part of what we talked about in our family. And a big part of my roots had to do with appreciation of international travel.
Okay, so tell me more about foreign languages, what he taught, and what your mother taught as well, if you could.
Yeah, she was a professor of pedagogy, so teaching student teachers to teach, and the methodologies around that. My dad taught actually quite a few languages before he became a university administrator. So he taught German most predominantly, but also French and Italian, Egyptian hieroglyphics. At one point, he taught Chinese, but I think that may have been overly ambitious. That he wasn't really at all fluent in Chinese, but he knew enough to teach freshmen. And he's taught Dutch. Oh, goodness gracious. Maybe I mentioned Spanish, but he picks up languages quite easily, much more gifted in that than I.
Okay, very interesting. So you grew up, and when you were going through high school, so I have to get into the American frame of mind here, high school, what did you want to do? What was your ambition? What did you want to do when you grew up?
At that point, I had a really grand ambition, which was to leave Mississippi.
Okay, I know that feeling. Yeah, sure. Yeah, get it.
I wanted to get out. I wanted to explore the world. When I was in high school, I actually did leave for a year. I did an exchange program through Congress Bundestag. It was an exchange between the two legislatures, Germany and the U.S. So I did a year at a gymnasium in Germany, in a town called Siegen. And then when I came back, I still had the same ambition to get out. And I applied to universities very far away from Mississippi. I ended up going to California for my undergraduate studies in international relations and African studies.
Okay. And then after that, did you go traveling, or did you go straight into the world of work after university?
No, I mine is a winding path. So when I left undergraduate school, I got another fellowship. Coming from professors, I figure anything I do has to involve either a fellowship or a degree.
Now, I'm going to have to stop you here. So this is one of these things I never look at. I don't know what a fellowship is. Please enlighten me.
Yeah, so I mean, it can vary, but a fellowship in this context was essentially getting money to go and pursue my research.
Gotcha. Okay.
So there was a grant or a fellowship offered by the German government, the Alexander von Humboldt Stiftung, which is a well-respected research organization tied to the government, and it was sponsored by Helmut Kohl at the time.
Oh.
So this dates me.
Dates me too. Yeah, it's that I recognize who he was. Yeah,
exactly. But I ended up in Hamburg for a year and did research into German-African relations. Okay. It was a fairly specific topic. And then the year after that, I spent in Cameroon, where I was helping to build a school close to the Cameroon-Nigerian border. And wonderful experience. And then went from there to graduate school back in New York. So I went to Columbia to pursue a degree in political science.
Okay. So graduate school is postgraduate, we call it, in the real world. But in the Americans say graduate school. No, they all, here in Japan, of course, it's all like majors and graduate school and all the American lingo. So just have to translate it for me sometimes. But okay, so you got around a little bit. You went to Cameroon, Nigeria. I'm not going to ask the year, but I can kind of.
Yeah, you can guess it.
Yeah, I can guess it. So
look at the gray hair.
So when you were in Germany, was this pre or post unification?
Oh yeah, great question.
Yeah.
Because I actually I ended up in Germany when unification happened. So I was in Berlin when the wall came down and things were happening. And well, not when the wall came down, but when reunification happened. So it was a very exciting time to be there, to be able to suddenly go from West Berlin to East Berlin. Millions of people on the street when unification happened, and then of course a lot of troubles trying to get the economies balanced, but they've in the interim got it together, I think.
What do you remember the song in 89, 90? What was the unification? Well, it became the unification song by
I know it wasn't Amadeus.
That was around then, wasn't it? Was it Wings of Change? Do you remember?
I don't.
By the Scorpions, wasn't it? Or not Scorpions? By the Scorpions. I'm not going to sing on the podcast, but it's not that kind of podcast. But yeah, I remember being in Europe around that time in school trip to Amsterdam and northern Germany, and that was played everywhere. I think around 89, 90. Yeah. So an exciting time. Do you in the mid 2000s and maybe a little bit later, there was kind of nostalgia for East Germany. Can you explain that to me?
I can speak to that some kind of. There was like this almost Heimat, like motherland, fatherland feeling, and I interestingly, in undergraduate school, I taught a course in German comedy, and there was already a taste of that with a couple of movies that were related to Trabis. Trabis are these old, like, 2-cylinder cars that kind of go along the road like pa-da-boom, pa-da-boom, pa-da-boom.
Is that a Trabant? Is it the same thing?
A Trabant, yeah, a Trabant, but it's more frequently in Germany just called a Trabi.
Oh, I see. Okay,
Apologies for the
no problem. Yeah, because
I
I know the Trabant, and then there's one I can't remember. I watched the film recently, Balloon in English. I don't know how you say ballon. No, I'm going French there. In how do you say in German? Ballon. You know the one where they try to escape in the balloon and
like a Luftballon, or
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
You know the 99 Luftballon. Yeah.
Oh yeah, of course. Well, yeah. I get that's more nostalgia, but sorry, the Trabant. Yes.
So that kind of that theme of harkening back to times in East Germany that in some cases were tough for people. But at the same time, and I'm no expert on East Germany, but there was a lot of reference back to a government that supported the arts very deeply. So every town had, well-supported orchestras because there was 100% employment. So you could actually, make your living as a cellist. So the arts were flourishing, medicine was provided and actually fairly advanced. There was countryside. But then there was just also crushing poverty and lack of economic development and a lot of other things that went with that. So, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
But nostalgia for sure.
Yeah, sure. So we'll move on. That's a really fascinating subject. So you moved from Germany and you, what happened then? You went went traveling again, or?
Yeah, so after that stint in Germany, so I did about 3 years in Germany. I did a year in Cameroon. I did postgraduate studies in New York. Then I did postgraduate studies and teaching at the University of Idaho. So I did a degree in poetry, shifting pretty far away from.
I'm kind of losing track here. How many degrees? You have?
I told you it was a winding path. You really don't know what you got yourself into. After the work in Idaho, I spent a year in Tanzania, again working on helping to build a school. you'll find the one thread through my travels and my life development is education. And so in Tanzania, I was working on writing a novel and project managing the construction of a school while teaching computer science and English and biology, I think at that time too. And then came back from there. And when I came back to the States after that, I came back to visit my parents with the intention of going to California to write screenplays. However, when I came back to visit my parents, they were friends with my now wife. So I came back from Tanzania, met my wife, and gave up completely on the whole idea of a screenplay career. I got a job for the Princeton Review, teaching tests and building up a program, and then went for another degree. So then I went and got an MBA at Duke with the idea of starting an international exchange company. So that sort of brings it somewhat full circle.
Okay, so your parents introduced you to your wife.
They loved her before I did. Yeah, they would have never have forgiven me had I not married her.
Wow, that's how it happens. So, as they say in Japan, omiai. I don't know. I know you said your wife is from South Korea. Do they have an equivalent word in Korean for like arranged marriage? I don't know.
I'm sure that there is.
Yeah,
but I don't know it.
Okay.
My wife actually speaks Japanese fluently as well. She lived in Osaka for quite some time.
Yeah, but Japanese and Koreans, they can kind of pick it up. My wife is big into BTS now. I think she's becoming fluent in
oh, there we go.
So that will happen. So then you work for the Princeton Review. Tell me about the Princeton Review.
Yeah, Princeton Review. Yeah. Interesting that I had then later ended up in Princeton with Educational Testing Service, but they're not related. Yeah, so the Princeton Review is, it's an organization that was built up really initially out of the trunk of someone's car, who was teaching kids how to overcome the dragon of the SAT. And really the company, I think, still maintains that kind of theme of defeating the tests. So it's largely built around the idea of you can learn what this test is about. You can improve your score dramatically by studying, learning what the question types are, learning what a right answer looks like versus a wrong answer. And in many cases, I found that to be true. I got to the point where I could get perfect scores on tests without reading the questions, just by looking at the answers. And then on the other hand, you have very advanced psychometricians and others who build tests that intend not to be something you can master except through skill and knowledge. So it's an interesting sort of war between the science of building tests and then the tricks to defeat the tests. So, but I was there for a couple of years.
It's an evolving war. I was watching a little bit earlier on YouTube. There was a documentary about, what is it, Pit Boss? Is that what they call? Not Pit Boss. Maybe the same in the casinos in Vegas. When you had there's the Pit Boss is the guy. He's kind of supervising the floor. But he was saying that we know most of the tricks that people have, card counting and cues, and they had like marking cards, etc. But what we're most afraid of is what we're not aware of, or what
we don't know.
Yeah. Is it the same in testing, that maybe there's tricks?
I think so.
Yeah.
There are hacks, and then there's also just raw cheating that happens as well. And the Princeton Review, to its credit, doesn't engage in that kind of behavior, but I know it does happen out there. But your Vegas example is funny in this context to me, because actually I started the Princeton Review offices in Nevada, so I was working out of Las Vegas. So I think especially with computer adaptive tests and kind of increasing multi-stage instruments in testing, the the mechanisms to understand where you're doing well, where you're doing poorly, and adapting how you respond based on difficulty of questions, that you have to begin to have really robust strategies around that changing test, as opposed to the old paper test where you could just say, the first questions are easy, the last questions are hard. So if you come to the last question on a paper test, you never pick what looks like the easy answer. You pick a complicated answer. The little things like that don't work as well anymore, but there are now strategies to overcome that.
Yeah, and of course, in the interview, he said, it's about the law of averages, isn't it? The odds of certain things happening, and he was,
Yep.
But one particular test I heard from a teacher, he said a test of 15 questions, multiple choice, and he got one student who got actually 0, which is statistically very difficult. I would
tough
think.
to do. You got to really try.
Yeah. So there you go. It does happen. But so let's move on. I really want to move on to EdAgree. I know you're chomping at the bit here to talk about EdAgree.
I'm just enjoying the conversation.
Great, me too. Yeah. So I said we would mention EdAgree, of course. So did you go straight to EdAgree? Where did your career take you between Princeton Review and EdAgree?
Well, I'm going to give you the very short version because the path continues to wind.
Okay.
So I had a position for a while with a subsidiary of Pearson and the Financial Times called NewsSift, running their kind of taxonomy, digital development. So among the poetry and other things, I am something of a nerd and a technophile. So I was helping to build an ontology for a semantic search engine. Moved from that role into Pearson proper, where I managed the taxonomy development across Pearson content to facilitate adaptive learning tools and products. Moved from there to a company called 2U, which is an online provider of graduate programs. So I was running their content development and collaborating with universities, and moved from there to ETS. So now we're at ETS, and I was at ETS for a couple of years running an agile development and innovation team to look at new kinds of products, because testing is changing, and the educational testing service is changing with the winds of the world. So we were looking at opportunities and looking at ways to better serve universities and students. But that really led to identifying some asymmetries of information and opportunities to deliver on ETS's promise of equity and access for students, but in a way that's more direct to consumer than ETS has previously done much. That was the launch of EdAgree. It was, how can we continue the ETS kind of mission, but do so in a more direct consumer way and in a more agile development framework. So EdAgree was founded and launched out of ETS really to build a platform to serve students and to be able to connect students to opportunities that would optimize their outcomes.
Okay, so tell me about EdAgree. You have the floor.
So I mean, that was a bit of it, right? But what we have on the platform is a lot of capabilities. So we're using some of the ETS technologies that are available. Your audience might be familiar with the likes of SpeechRater, which is the speaking assessment tool behind the TOEFL. So students can come to the EdAgree platform for free. We never charge students anything. So they come to the EdAgree platform, they can practice their speaking and get live feedback, scores on their pronunciation, their periodicity, different aspects of the spoken language, with really cutting edge technology. So that's one of the capabilities. We have a video interview practice. So kids can get ready to do their visa interview or an undergraduate school interview. We have a learning style assessment. So kids can begin to think about the kinds of programs where they might do well. We also partner with now 18 universities where we are doing direct recruiting for those universities. So finding opportunities for students to get into universities where they best fit. I'd say our biggest claim to fame in that context right now is that 100% of the students who have applied to universities through EdAgree have been enrolled or gotten into the universities. And that's because we are very careful to ensure that a student matches the criteria of the university. We're working closely with the admissions department. We don't make decisions about admissions, but we do make sure that a student doesn't apply to a school in a way that's going to waste their time. If you apply through EdAgree and you put your application through, you're very, very likely to find a place at that university if you want that place. We're also collaborating with high schools and the like to do college training for students and bring content to the students around what it means to study abroad, how one can put one's best foot forward, as it were. But the core is to have a platform where students can gather and learn and get to know themselves.
Okay, so for the little bit of the inside track for somebody not from the US and for back home in Ireland or in the UK, it's very straightforward. I think maybe with the exception of Oxford, Cambridge, for some courses they have the famous interviews, don't they? But
right.
Usually it's just you get X score, you're in the university, aren't you? But it's not like that in the US, is it? There's a lot more like extracurricular and
that's right.
Yeah.
That's it's a great question, and it's often true, right? I mean, there are cases where state schools will sometimes just say, just the numbers, please, and they don't consider additional factors. But I would say the majority of universities in the U.S. for undergraduate school and graduate school look not only at your GPA, which would mean grade point average. They'll look at that and look at any standardized test scores, but they also try to look more holistically. So if a student claims that she or he is interested in computer science and wants to pursue a degree, the admissions team will often look for some evidence that that student really is interested in that field. So were they in a club? Have they done any programming? And absent that kind of evidence, they may have trouble getting into the program. Whereas in many of the universities abroad, here are the qualifying numbers to get into computer science. Okay, now you can do it. So it can be a bit different.
Yeah, that's the case, because I know from a number of friends and acquaintances, they've started on certain courses and maybe never took the course in high school, but then they transferred after a year, dropped out. So in the US, that's less likely, is it, in comparison?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of shuffling around in the U.S. once kids get into undergraduate school. Not so much in graduate school or postgraduate school, as you corrected me, or postgraduate. Yeah.
No, I didn't correct you. I was just interpreting for other people. It's of course
simultaneous translation.
There you go.
Yeah, so I would say that. Especially in programs that are very competitive. The undergraduate programs in particular will be looking for differentiating evidence that a student is going to be committed to a particular direction and has the ability to succeed. Because the universities want the students to succeed just as much as the students do. They'd like to have successful alumni paying into the university endowment, of course. But I mean, even at less competitive schools, they like to see that kind of connection between the topic and the studies that are aspired to. But very often also, I mean, this was true for me. I think you could probably guess this from the path I took that went down so many directions. But when I went to undergraduate school, I chose my undergraduate school because I wanted to do neuroscience. And that's not where I went, obviously.
So it didn't work out like that for you. So the reason why I asked that question, just through out of interest on my part, but also for people who maybe are running schools and they find maybe they're not so familiar with the matriculation process in the US. And so it's not as opaque as some people might think. It's
I would say it's in general it's not opaque.
Yeah.
I think the admissions teams at universities strive to be as transparent as they can, and typically they'll have all of their materials published. What it is, though, is more varied in terms of what is acceptable for admissions. So, and this is becoming more true, not less true. So, I mean, you see recently California dropped the SAT. So they have less of a standardized capacity now to judge students. That means they have to look even more holistically. And in that context, an admissions team will often take a variety of types of evidence. So they're trying to pull out enough variables that they can describe a student as likely to succeed. And it doesn't always mean the same thing for every student, which can be, there's an interesting conversation to be had there about fairness. But it's nonetheless the situation we're in.
Yeah, I mean, we could go down a very tricky route there with fairness and equity, and whether testing is good and whether SAT discriminates, and some of they've done away completely with testing. Whether that's as they say, it's above my pay grade, as they say in Bosch, or these TV shows. So how is EdAgree different from your competitors? Or so what do you offer?
That's another really, really good question. And I would suggest that our predominant difference in terms of strategy is that we are looking to be a hub for aspiring international students that is of ever-growing value for those students. That if one aspires to be an international student, or if one is a counselor of international students, EdAgrees should become the place that students go to build up their digital portfolio, to get ready to take a high-stakes assessment, where they come to get ready to do a high-stakes interview. And that doesn't really exist out there other than with us as a really cutting-edge set of capabilities that serves the students. So our business model is to provide the information and the resources to students, and then to provide the connective tissue to the services that are out there in the environment. So you would probably go from EdAgree to take a high-stakes test, but you would be able to find it quickly and register for it easily. You would be able to go find someone to help you to craft personal essays. EdAgree itself would not be providing that kind of help, but we will have the connections to provide those services to students. So I really think of us as a hub that will serve international students, and that will also, and this goes back to, I think, our ETS roots, which are somewhat unique. We are also a hub that will validate the information for students. So ultimately, universities will be able to come to the EdAgree platform and discover students who meet their criteria, but also be able to trust the GPA, the information about the students, because it's been validated and vetted. So it creates a much more efficient mechanism for students to be served by their ecosystem. And it creates a much more efficient mechanism for universities to identify prospects who will do well within their campus.
Okay, so the big C used to mean something different, but of course we have COVID now. Things have changed. Mm-hmm. I've met a number of students there on paper attending. I was speaking to somebody a few months ago. He enrolled in a university course in Hungary. He's on campus digitally, but he's never actually been to Hungary because of COVID.
Right.
The world that we're living in. So what exactly is happening now with university admissions?
Yeah, I mean, so university admissions ask the same thing daily.
Yeah. Okay.
So I mean, it's been truly a learning process for universities. However, campuses are opening back up. So I think there's a fairly universal perception that we're coming to the end of the tunnel.
We think so, and then there's another one around the corner.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's Omicron that's rearing its ugly head, and will have an impact going forward. But there's a lot going on in the background of that. I mean, everyone in your audience is aware of the success that vaccines are facing, but also the challenges around Omicron. But Omicron is looking like it might be less virulent than some of the other variants. And this is becoming more the norm. So COVID is not going away. So while there's the light at the end of the tunnel, the end of the tunnel does not mean the end of COVID. It simply means that we're coming to a reality, and that will include international travel, but that will also include COVID. So safety protocols are going to be in place. I think COVID will become, the new flu shot, because the virus actually mutates even faster than the flu, it turns out. So a lot in that answer. But admissions teams are the ones that we're talking with, and we talk to admissions teams daily. But they are optimistic about bringing in students in fall of 22 in particular. That was not the case for fall of 21. So borders, even though they're closed right now because of Omicron, borders are opening and travel is kicking off. And you can see, things like airline stocks, they're very volatile, but they're starting to trend back up because people are confident that flights will happen again. So there's a lot there. I don't know if I sufficiently answered your question, but
it's a difficult question, of course, and we all want answers, don't we? And nobody has them. It's just a situation, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my summary of the situation is that I'm optimistic because I've been through this pretty bleak period and talking to a lot of international students and admissions teams where it just looked hopeless. And that attitude has shifted, and I think there's the sense that there are more tools in the toolbox now to move forward.
Okay, and how is it going to change universities in the long run? Of course, there's going to be the distancing measures, but is the model for education in the future the hybrid model, or will totally online universities gain more traction than they've had? There's not been so much disruption in the education field, has there? But this is coming.
There have been pockets of great disruption, right? So assessment companies, for example, who were ready to go fully online, I would take Duolingo as an example, just exploded in growth. Whereas providers that didn't have that capability really suffered at the beginning and have now begun to get their feet under them. I do think that hybrid education is going to become more the norm. Undergraduates are going to want to go to a campus. They're going to want their college experience. Postgraduate students are going to want to sit around a table and kind of stroke their chins and think about deep issues and have conversations. So it's not going to stop. But I do think that students will have the option of, viewing some lectures online and then going to discussions or, going to study groups, things like that. So the dynamics of study may change dramatically. I suspect they will. And resources like library books, which, in my days, you had to actually, blow the dust off the cover and open it and do your reading that way. But it's all going to be on iPads now. So, what's going to happen in that context, in the context of libraries and like the physicality of learning could change dramatically.
Yeah, and when the lecturer put up the reading list and people would run from the auditorium to the library, because it was like 5 or 6 copies only.
Yeah. At the reserve desk. Yeah.
Yeah, that was they were the good old days. But now, of course, it's all so much more convenient. I think it's at the
it is,
and cheaper as well, of course.
And much cheaper.
Yeah. So what's What's the future for you and EdAgree? What's the medium-term, long-term plan here for you and your company?
Yeah, well, I mean, we have, like very exciting opportunity in the near term that I think also bespeaks some of the directions we're heading in. So in January, we're doing our first college fair, right? So because we now have 18 universities and colleges together, we can work directly with high schools and say, here are 18 schools that are ready to accept your kids. So we have an opportunity to do direct connection to universities and to do training and information.
Would you like to, Marlowe, but would you like to name the universities you work with? Just name drop.
I'll name drop a few. So University of Iowa is one, University of Kansas, Oregon, Tennessee, SUNY Oswego, University of Nevada, Las Vegas. We can't get away from Las Vegas today, it seems.
Yeah.
University of New Mexico, also Highline College, Hope College, and let's see, Virginia State University. By the way, if people are following this on the map, this is like popping up cities all over the U.S. I can name a few more in a moment if you need be. But one of the themes I want to pick out of that is that our strategy in working with universities has been to get geographic diversity and size diversity in the universities and program diversity. So we are not, and I should have specified this before because you were mentioning competition, we are not an aggregator. So we are not trying to put students in front of 3,000 universities and say, apply. So that's not the game we're playing. We are working with the students and advocating for the students to identify where they might succeed in these universities. And if we feel that they won't succeed, we're going to be very honest with them. Because a lot of students end up applying to 8 or 9 universities. Sometimes they only then discover that it's going to cost them, $30,000 a year to go to university. And then they say, well, I don't have any money, even though they've already paid their application fees. So we're trying to cut that waste out for students and just be a direct advocate. So,
okay,
I answered, but then I drifted.
No, that's just fine. That's just fine. I just, when you name these places, what immediately comes into my mind is the movies. So, if I think about Iowa, I think Field of Dreams. If I think of Kansas, I think of the movie Kansas. I don't know if you know. So Matt Damon was in that one, maybe Andrew McCarthy. I don't know. This is going back, Sean. And of course, when you think about New Mexico, it's like, of course, Breaking Bad. So
yeah. Oh my goodness. So you're putting everything in a movie. I love it.
Yeah, I know. That's I'm a bit of a movie buff. So
and I would add, we're also down in Florida here with the Florida Institute of Technology, which is a really fine school. So and some programs graduate, some undergraduate or postgraduate.
No, you don't need to correct yourself there. But and do you find that for students applying their, I don't know, to try to sell maybe Kansas or Iowa is a more difficult sell than maybe California or Florida? Or
I don't think so. I mean, one of the reasons it's not is both of those are very well recognized schools and highly rated schools with a depth of programs that really has reach globally. So those schools haven't been particularly difficult to do recruiting for or to advertise or connect students to. I mean, there is in some ways a predilection for the coasts. When students are looking at universities, but I think in the end, many of the large schools and small schools in the Midwest and kind of across the U.S. have very big infrastructures internally and the ability to support international students, in some cases better than, say, a Harvard. I'm not saying they have the resources of Harvard or Stanford or Princeton, but in many cases, students aren't aware of something like an honors college, right, within a larger school.
What is an honors college?
So an honors college is a path into a university that is reserved for students who can show high academic performance, typically. So these would be students who, probably did do very well on standardized tests and have high GPAs. But often there is a set of faculty that are specifically allocated to work with honors college students. And they're asked to do projects that are much deeper in terms of research and take on internships with local companies. They end up having a level of attention that's not available to the typical undergraduate, and they typically graduate into much more prominent graduate programs, even than those who are coming out of Ivy League schools. So if you look at it from a percentage, so that's the kind of mission that EdAgree has, is to point to these pathways for students that don't just serve them in terms of, okay, we're going to get you into a top 10 school where you will struggle and spend a lot of money, and then graduate maybe with a C average, and then try to get into a good graduate program. You might do better to look at an honors college where you're going to have, really bespoke attention and be able to work directly with a professor and work in a company. And then, those kind of pathways are a big part of our mission.
Gotcha. I have one more question, and that came to mind about what we say, U.S. university jargon. The dean's list, is that similar to the honor roll or not?
Oh, honors college, I think you mean.
Or honors college. Sorry, yes.
The dean's list is similar to the honor roll.
Honor roll. Gotcha.
The dean's list is really those are kids in the university who got good grades, basically. Okay. I mean, it's so that's a recurring opportunity to show that you're developing well and performing at a high level. And so students who are on the dean's list sometimes have access to additional scholarships, for example.
Gotcha. Okay. So this is useful just not for because a lot of the people here, they may be teaching TOEFL, and these are the kind of things you hear on TOEFL. I want to get on the dean's list, and if you're not from the US, you have to explain what a dean's list is, or an honors roll, and valedictorian and grade point average.
Well, there's also I mean, there are also dean's scholarships for students coming in. So then there can be a dean's list like for applying students as well. But with that, there's typically a requirement to maintain a certain GPA, or you lose that funding.
Gotcha. Okay, that's the point. So, if any of our listeners, it's been a fascinating listen about you, your company, and U.S. universities, and your take on the future, and so much more. But if companies, individuals want to work with you, interested in what you're doing, who are you looking to partner with?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I mean, because as I described it already to you, because we're a platform, we do have very broad opportunities for collaboration, because we want to bring in services that are going to sincerely serve students. And so certainly language preparation schools, high schools we are partnering with. And when we're partnering with high schools in particular, we've been offering bundles that are inclusive of opportunities for things like TOEFL vouchers for students. So I would say also, I mean, we're collaborating very closely with ETS, so we have opportunities to discount TOEFL. We also have opportunities to help students find kind of other assessments, whether they be around personality or language. So while we're under ETS, we are agnostic of the tests that students take. So we're not promoting any particular partner or direction for students. We're only promoting that pathway to success. But any organization out there that is counseling students, teaching students, preparing them for study abroad, that should be a theme within what they're doing, is thinking about study abroad or English education. Students can benefit from our capabilities, whether they study abroad or not. They can do their speaking practice, writing essays, etc., all for free. That information could go back to a high school, and they could actually look at what their students are doing based on what they've done on our platform. So I'd say reach out to us if you're an agent, a counselor, a high school, a university that is looking to increase its enrollment. We're also in a very good position to connect your listening audience to folks at ETS if they have questions about tests, test development capabilities, things like that. And we've done that in many cases, formed kind of bridges between folks out there and ETS, even if we're not directly engaged as the kind of moderator, just to kind of help build connections.
Okay, fantastic. So it's as we mentioned, ETS this year, as this podcast will be coming out in January, we'll be running the EFL Magazine TOEFL conference again in August. So always be closing, as they said in a famous movie. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about that over the coming weeks and months on the podcast as well, how people can get involved. So if people want to contact, go ahead.
Can I interrupt on that?
Absolutely. I've been doing it all evening, so you do. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, on the always closing bit, because I was talking about all the folks who should come to us, I should also tell them how. So we are EdAgree, so that's ed as in education and agree as in we agree with you. So EdAgree.com. Is our kind of website. We also have a platform, which is my.edagree.com. But yeah, just come on. You can chat with us. We have a chat function. We have email, so we'll respond very quickly.
Okay, fantastic. And I know we're not going to go into how we got to know each other. It's a long story, but maybe too long for the podcast. But if people want to connect with you, you are on LinkedIn, and you.
I am. Yep. Yeah. So Marlowe Johnson, Marlowe. I'm constantly networking. So I would also, to your listeners, I would say don't be shy about reaching out at all. And I'm quite likely to respond because I kind of live to talk and to meet people. So.
Okay, fantastic. Well, Marlowe, I've really enjoyed our conversation today, and thank you again.
Likewise, Philip, it's been a real pleasure. And thanks for doing this podcast. I think it's a really good service for your audience.
Thanks for listening to the EFL Magazine Business Podcast with Philip Pound. For more great advice and resources, check out eflmagazine.com. If you found this podcast helpful, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. See you next time.